What if I told you that one of the most powerful queens in history shocked her entire court by breaking every royal tradition, not on the battlefield, not in politics, but in love? On October 15th, 1839, Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom did something unthinkable for a monarch. Instead of waiting to be courted, instead of standing as the untouchable prize of Europe, she knelt figuratively and proposed marriage to her own first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Welcome, my friends, to this channel where we drag the strangest, darkest, and most unsettling secrets of history back into the light. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because tonight's story is one that will haunt you, charm you, and make you question the very foundations of royal power. The marriage of Victoria and Albert is often told as a romance, the tale of a young queen who defied convention for love. And yes, theirs was a bond of affection and respect, a partnership that would shape the Victorian age itself. But hidden beneath the silks and diamonds, beneath the royal portraits and national myths, lies a deeper, darker truth. For this was not just a love story, it was also a dynastic arrangement built on consanguinity. Across Europe, royal families routinely married their cousins, their nieces, even their uncles. The goal was to keep power within the bloodline, to preserve dynastic purity. But the cost was high. Fragile children, inherited diseases, and an empire built on genetic weakness. Victoria's choice to marry Albert was both deeply personal and politically inevitable. It tied Britain to Germany, reinforced dynastic bonds, and secured heirs. Yet it also perpetuated the cycle of inbreeding that had already devastated other royal houses, most famously the Habsburgs of Spain. And as if history wanted to remind us of the strangeness of monarchy, their union was marked by one of the most bizarre wedding gifts ever recorded. A giant cheese wheel weighing more than 500 kilograms, made from the milk of 750 cows. Imagine it the Queen of England, crowned in jewels, standing beside her new husband as farmers presented her with a mountain of cheese. This is not simply the story of a royal romance. It is the story of a dynasty caught between love and duty, between power and blood. A story of devotion, but also of danger, because even the most passionate love cannot escape the weight of history. Stay with me, because what begins with a kiss in Windsor Castle ends with a genetic shadow cast across all of Europe. To understand the strange and haunting marriage of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, we must first understand the world into which they were born, a world where love was rarely free, and where the blood of kings was considered more valuable than gold. Victoria was born in 1819, the daughter of Edward, Duke of Kent, and Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. From the moment she entered the world, her future was already scripted by dynastic politics. As a child, she lived under strict supervision, often isolated, raised not as a girl, but as a symbol of continuity for the British throne. She was to embody stability, power, and royal blood. Albert, too, was born in 1819, just a few months after Victoria. He was her cousin, the son of Duke Ernest, the first of Saxe-Coburg, and Duchess Louise. His upbringing in Germany was strict, intellectual, and steeped in the traditions of a minor but ambitious German duchy. He was trained in philosophy, music, science, and governance. To the world, Albert was a model prince, but also a pawn in a far larger game. That game was the preservation of royal bloodlines. Across Europe, royal families had long engaged in what we now recognize as consanguineous marriage unions between close relatives. Cousins married cousins, uncles wed nieces, and in some dynasties, even siblings were forced into arranged unions. The justification was always the same: to keep power and wealth within the family, to preserve purity of blood. The Habsburgs were the most infamous example. Their obsession with intermarriage produced rulers with the grotesque Habsburg jaw and entire generations plagued with infertility and disease. And yet, Despite such examples, the practice continued because to the minds of monarchs, the dynasty mattered more than the individual. Victoria grew up surrounded by this reality. Her own family tree was filled with interwoven branches of Coburgs, Hanoverians, and other royal houses. To marry outside of these circles would have been unthinkable. It would mean diluting the bloodline, breaking the invisible chain that bound kings to kings. Albert, as her cousin, was both familiar and inevitable. From their earliest years, whispers of a possible match followed them. To their families, it was not simply a marriage of affection, but a calculated move to bind Britain and the German states more closely together. And yet, here lies the irony. While history paints their love as genuine and indeed, letters reveal their affection, the marriage also continued a dangerous genetic cycle. By choosing Albert, Victoria ensured her children would inherit not only crowns, but also the risks of inbreeding. Hemophilia, famously known as the royal disease, would spread through their descendants, crippling monarchies from Russia to Spain. Thus, the childhoods of Victoria and Albert were never truly their own. They were heirs and pawns, raised in palaces, but bound by invisible chains of duty. Their meeting was not just chance, but destiny one written in blood long before they ever saw each other. October 15th, 1839. Windsor Castle. The air was heavy with tension. Queen Victoria was only 20 years old, but she had already ruled Britain for 2 years. Her advisors whispered constantly of marriage, of alliances, of the need to secure the throne with heirs. Yet, no suitor truly dared approach the young queen. After all, how could one propose to a monarch? Victoria solved the problem herself. In her private apartments, she summoned her cousin, Prince Albert. He had been visiting England, and though his manners were quiet, his intellect and charm impressed her deeply. Still, the court expected her to remain passive, to wait. But Victoria was not a queen who waited. She looked Albert in the eye and did the unthinkable. She asked him to marry her. "I said to him," she later wrote in her diary, "that it would make me too happy if he would consent to what I wished." Albert, overwhelmed, accepted. And with that, one of the most famous marriages in royal history was sealed, not by tradition, but by Victoria's own will. The news spread quickly. A queen had proposed to her cousin. To the outside world, it looked like romance, but within the court, it also sparked unease. The marriage strengthened ties between Britain and the German Duchy of Coburg, but it also repeated the ancient pattern of inbreeding that haunted Europe as dynasties. Their wedding in February 1840 was a spectacle of power and wealth. Victoria wore a white gown of silk satin, setting a trend that would redefine bridal fashion across the West. Albert stood at her side in uniform, embodying youthful dignity. Crowds filled the streets, church bells rang, and newspapers proclaimed the union of Britain's beloved queen with her devoted prince. But amid the grandeur, one gift captured imaginations and bewildered many. English farmers presented the royal couple with a giant cheese wheel, weighing over 500 kilograms, made from the milk of 750 cows. It was so massive that it required several men to roll it into place. The symbolism was clear. This was the nourishment of the land, the loyalty of the people, compressed into a single monument of dairy. Yet it was also faintly absurd. A mountain of cheese at the feet of the world's most powerful woman. The image lingers like something out of satire, a reminder that monarchy often straddles the line between majesty and the ridiculous. For Victoria and Albert, however, the wedding was more than pageantry. It was the beginning of a partnership that would define an age. Behind the ceremonies and the gifts, behind the diamonds and the cheese, there lay a deeper story, one of devotion, duty, and the invisible dangers of dynastic marriage. The marriage of Victoria and Albert began with warmth, devotion, and a partnership rare among royals. Unlike many dynastic unions, theirs was filled with genuine affection. Victoria adored Albert, his discipline, his intellect, his moral seriousness. Albert, in turn, guided her with patience and steadiness, helping to shape her reign into what would be known as the Victorian Age. Yet beneath the public image of harmony, shadows loomed. Theirs was not just a marriage of two individuals, but a union loaded with expectations, dynastic, political, and biological. For the survival of the monarchy, Victoria was expected to produce heirs, and she did 9 children in total. Each one carried both the promise of continuity and the curse of genetic fragility. Behind palace walls, Victoria often struggled. She was passionate, impulsive, sometimes volatile. She relied on Albert not only for counsel, but for emotional stability. In private letters, she confessed her dependence on him, even describing herself as being ruled by him. To the outside world, she was the sovereign queen. Inside her marriage, Albert often held the reins. Albert, however, bore his own burdens. He was intelligent and progressive, but also deeply anxious about morality and order. He pushed Victoria toward moderation, away from her fiery temper. He immersed himself in reforms, education, science, architecture, leaving behind the grand vision of the Great Exhibition of 1851. Yet, the court never fully embraced him. To many English nobles, Albert remained a foreigner, a German prince who had married into their throne. Together, Victoria and Albert became symbols of domestic virtue. Paintings showed them with their children, presenting an image of a perfect royal family. The public adored this vision, seeing it as a moral anchor in a rapidly changing world. But the reality was more complex. Their children, spread across Europe through marriages, would carry with them not only crowns, but also disease. The most infamous legacy was hemophilia, the so-called royal disease, likely carried by Victoria herself. It spread through her descendants to Russia, Spain, and Germany. Her grandsons and great-grandsons would bleed uncontrollably from minor wounds, and royal houses would collapse under the strain of hereditary weakness. For Victoria and Albert, the shadow of genetics was invisible but ever-present. Their love was sincere, their partnership genuine, but the very closeness of their blood tied their dynasty to a future of fragility. And then came tragedy. In 1861, Albert fell ill with what was likely typhoid fever. At only 42, he died, leaving Victoria shattered. She withdrew from public life, dressed in mourning black for the rest of her life, and ruled from behind veils of grief. The great romance had ended, but the shadow it cast would stretch far beyond their lifetimes. When Prince Albert died in 1861, Queen Victoria's life shattered. For the next 40 years, she dressed in black, retreating into a widowhood so intense that the public began to see her as a ghostly figure rather than a living sovereign. Yet while Victoria mourned, her 9 children carried her blood across Europe, weaving her legacy into nearly every royal house on the continent. This was the triumph and the curse of Victoria's dynasty. Her daughters and sons married into the courts of Germany, Russia, Denmark, and Spain. Soon she was nicknamed the Grandmother of Europe. But along with crowns and titles, they carried something darker, the genetic legacy of consanguinity. Hemophilia, the royal disease, haunted her descendants. Her son Leopold, Duke of Albany, suffered from it directly. Her daughter Alice passed it to the Russian royal family. Through them, the young Tsarevich Alexei, heir to the Romanov throne, bled uncontrollably, his life bound to a disease that would destabilize an empire. The whispers of weakness spread from palace to palace, undermining the aura of invincibility that monarchies relied upon. Even beyond hemophilia, Victoria's legacy revealed the dangers of interwoven bloodlines. Her children's marriages created alliances that tied Europe into a vast web so vast that when World War I erupted in 1914, many of the leaders were her grandchildren. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, and King George V of Britain were all related. They called each other cousin, even as they sent millions of men to die on the battlefield. The image of Victoria, as the matriarch of Europe, is double-edged. On one side, she represented unity. Through her descendants, she connected empires and kingdoms. On the other, she embodied fragility. Her genetic inheritance carried disease. Her alliances bred rivalries, and her obsession with Albert's memory left her court stagnant. Perhaps the strangest symbol of her legacy, though, remains the wedding gift of the giant cheese wheel. That absurd monument rolled into her marriage as a sign of loyalty and abundance now reads like a metaphor. It was heavy, unwieldy, impossible to ignore, just like the burdens of her dynasty. It nourished her power, but it also revealed the bizarre contradictions of monarchy. Majesty mingled with absurdity, devotion laced with decay. Victoria died in 1901, closing not just a reign but an era. The Victorian age had reshaped Britain and the world. Yet behind the railways and factories, behind the empire's glory, lay a human story marked by grief, obsession, and bloodlines too tightly bound. Her marriage to Albert was real love, yes, but it was also a continuation of the old royal game, where cousins wed cousins, and empires risked their future for the illusion of purity. And in the end, it is that shadow, the shadow of inbreeding, that defines her dynasty as much as her triumphs.